gentlemen, welcome to America's Auto Enthusiast Program. This is Auto World. And now, here's your host, Bob Long.
Hi, everybody. Welcome in. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Bob Long, and I have my 7-year-old daughter right next to me right now. You want to say hello, Lucy? No. Well, you did say hello, even though you didn't mean to. In this hour, we're going to be talking about lubrication with a certified lubrication specialist, more than 25 years worth of experience, and he's one of the largest AMSOIL distributors in the USA as well as all throughout Canada. So this is the time, this is the hour for you to dial us up at our regular number, 855-660-4261, 855-660-4261, or if you prefer, and many people do these days, welcome everybody into another hour of Auto World. I don't know how much you guys heard of my introduction there, but apologize, some technical glitches from my studio to the Master Control studio in Minnesota, but we've got them all those bugs worked out now, and we welcome our certified lubrication specialist with more than 25 years worth of experience, Dan Watson, back to Auto World. Dan, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good, Bob. How are you tonight?
Not too bad. Never like having technical issues, but that's what happens when you do live radio.
You bet.
And certainly over the years, I know you've done a lot of radio on the local level, the national level, and when it comes to YouTube, you're a star on there. There's no other way to say it. And we're going to get a link up on autoworldradio.com directing folks to your specific videos. But how did that all begin?
Well, when it comes to the YouTube videos, I have always had over the years training sessions with other AMSOIL dealers where we go over certain technical things. And so as technology came along, I decided that I should record some of these and make them available for some dealers that I would have that were in different parts of the country and not local that could come to my training. So I decided to do that. And then one of my technical gurus said, well, you could try putting this on YouTube and see if you get any activity. And so we posted the first 2 or 3 of those up, and the activity was a little bit overwhelming. So we decided then that we would continue to post those training videos. They came right out of an active interchange or meeting that I had with other AMSOIL distributors. So it worked out. We've had lots and lots of visits to those and people that have emailed me off of those and called me, and they've gone to my website, the Lube page. So eventually we even moved the ability to see those directly on the lubepage.com. So they're in 2 places, both on the channel on YouTube and at the lubepage.com, my master website. So it's been good and well received. One of them, we were talking about diesels last week, and there's one YouTube that's about the regeneration process and what that's all about for the diesel exhaust system. And last time I saw it, it had, well over 100,000, maybe even now 150,000 views from people, because it's an area that few people are familiar with and many people own diesels and they don't really know what that's all about. So a lot of people have looked at that particular YouTube video.
Broadcasting from the middle of Corvette Boulevard and Stingray Avenue, this is Auto World with your host, Bob Long.
That would be myself. Thank you very much for being with us, and we apologize to all of our stations as well as our special guest, one of our regular contributors, Dan Watson, as we're having some digital componentry problems between my studio and Master Control studio in Minnesota. But we'll continue with Dan, and And worst case scenario, if I get hung up on again, we'll do it a different way. But Dan, that's so great news, spreading the word about diesel. And as I was saying, I don't know if you heard me, there are a lot of diesel trucks in the works. There are a lot of diesel automobiles in the works. So diesel is not dead, and diesel is dead as far as the Volkswagen group is concerned, but lots of other manufacturers are going to be selling diesel cars and trucks.
Well, Bob, I would even say Volkswagen TDI diesel, they'll recover. It was a shame that the Volkswagen company attempted to play around with the fuel economy and the pollution numbers when they didn't have to. I mean, I know a number of people that own those Volkswagen turbo diesels, and I'd say of the people I know, they average about 50 miles per gallon. Now, I don't know exactly what their pollution numbers are in that aspect, but as far as the performance of the engine and its fuel efficiency and what it does, it's a terrific little power plant. In fact, some years ago, I was given the ability to somebody sent to me, read about these 4 traveling businessmen that were in Europe, and they rented a Volkswagen with the turbo diesel in it, a European, not an American qualified model. And they got 72 miles per gallon. They also did a European Ford with a little diesel in it, and they got 68 miles per gallon with that. And the problem comes down to is that the United States said that these cars possibly couldn't be meeting our pollution standards is the reason why they were not authorized to be imported. Then when these guys did their report, said they investigated here when they got home because they want to know where they could get one of these. And they found out that the EPA and the people on that side of the house said they'd never been approached about this, so they didn't prevent these cars from being imported. They went around and around, to make a long story short, and what they determined was that the U.S. government doesn't know how we're going to achieve the necessary road tax on cars that start to get 70 miles per gallon. It destroys our tax base, and they haven't yet figured out how to tax electric cars and even hybrids for the road. And our road tax is beginning to decrease in amount rather than increase like it has historically. Every year it's gone up, and now with all these vehicles, these higher mileage, they use less fuel and they pay less fuel tax, and the coffers of road tax is not where they want it to be. So sometimes my father's postulate, let's say, his advice when he always said, you're getting wrapped up in the technology of things. You need to follow the money trail. Because if you follow the money trail, you may find the real reason something's happening. And here, everybody was trying to figure out the technology or why these cars weren't being imported and what's going on, and they're thinking it's got to do with technology, and it more than likely, I can't certify that, but more than likely was strictly based on the inability to figure out how to get enough taxes off of these vehicles to support their using the roads. So diesels are tremendous power plants. The Europeans use about 60% of all their vehicles on the road are diesels. I travel to Israel on a fairly regular basis. I went to Israel a couple years back and just purposely noticed, and just about everybody was driving these small diesel-powered Peugeots, and there was a different one, too. It was a German-made one, and little English cars, and they all had what you can recognize as a typical low-powered hearing diesel running, right? The way they run.
Yeah.
And they're everywhere. It was rare, actually, to see a gasoline-powered vehicle because all those cars are 50 mile per gallon or better vehicles. Those vehicles probably wouldn't meet the U.S. pollution standards because that's the reason why I didn't see any U.S. version there. They were all European versions that were they could buy, and they were sold to them, and they were satisfactory. Here's the thing about diesels when we get into, and we talked last week about this, Bob. Diesels are now called, most of the time, clean diesel technology.
Mm-hmm.
And what that has to do with mostly is the fuel. In 1995 time frame, you could have 2,500 parts per million of sulfur in standard diesel. Now, a few years later, I believe it was somewhere around 2000, a little bit before, they came out with a regulation for low sulfur diesel. That meant you couldn't have more than 500 parts per million. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So they're cleaning up that diesel. Now, that sulfur creates all kinds of exhaust compounds, sulfur dioxide, sulfur trioxide, sulfuric acid. I mean, it's a big deal. And it goes right through the engine. The sulfur doesn't burn, so it ends up going out in the exhaust. Well, the ultra-low sulfur diesel came into being, and when they did that, it has to be below 15 parts per million. So we're talking about diesel originally 2,500 parts per million, then 500 parts per million, and then 15 parts per million. So part of the real cleanup in the diesel world, the smell of the fuel and all that, was refining it down and cleaning it up to 15 parts per million. Now, that created another problem. That diesel at 15 parts per million is what the old-timers would call dry fuel. It has virtually no lubricating quality. And in your diesel engine, you've got high-pressure fuel pumps and fuel injectors, which have moving parts. And you lubricate all that with the diesel. That's how they were originally built, with the materials. So we went through a phase of a lot of problems. Ultra-low sulfur diesel and movable parts like fuel pumps and injectors wearing out due to no lubricity in the fuel. And they changed the materials to help with that, and then they also dictate a certain amount of an additive put into the diesel to give it some lubrication quality. But quite frankly, it's the lowest concentration allowed, LCA. That's what it's referred to. And it's not very high. So I typically recommend to diesel owners that they run some type of injector cleaner that also functions as a lubricant. Okay? I'll explain a lot more of that stuff when we come back after the break, but it's stuff that diesel owners need to know.
You need to know. You need to stay right where you are. This is Auto World. My name is Bob Long. Don't go away.
Up on the right, you roll down the window of your shiny new Jag and challenge me then and there to a drag. I said you're on, buddy, my milk's running fine.
And now, back to the show with the highest octanes, Auto World, and your host, Bob Long.
Thank you for joining us around the world via GCNlive.com and across all of our great radio stations, all the way from Maine down to Florida, over to New Mexico, up to Alaska, and everybody listening in Canada as well. We would love to hear from you, 855-660-4261, or email bob@autoworldradio.com. One of our regular contributors, Dan Watson, CEO of the Lube Page, thelubepage.com. This gentleman is a certified lubrication specialist with more than 25 years worth of experience, and he takes time out every week out of his busy schedule to join us and educate us more. And we've been talking about diesel. And before that hard bottom of the hour break, Dan, you were saying that people really need to learn more about diesels.
Well, in this part with the fuel, what is important is that knowing that ultra-low sulfur diesel creates a situation where the diesel is no longer the lubricating fluid it was for the moving parts of your high-pressure fuel pump and your injectors, you will protect yourself by doing something about that. Now, if you don't, these things will not stop running tomorrow, but the life will be cut in half on these great, fantastic engines, because what happens is your high-pressure fuel pump will begin to wear, and as it begins to wear, eventually it will not be able to make that high pressure necessary to operate through the fuel injectors. And then you have to go get a fuel pump replacement, and that's expensive. So here's the thing. You got to run some type of lubricating additive, all right? And since in these diesels, we talked about this last week, that you must have clean injectors. If you don't have clean injectors, both your efficiency goes down and your soot production goes up. And all of these diesels have diesel particulate filters, which filter out soot and exhaust. We described last week how when those filters get enough soot in them to create a back pressure to the engine, the computer tells the system it's time to regenerate that diesel particulate filter. And in some models, it pushes fuel through on the exhaust stroke back to that filter. That filter literally burns out and cleans all the carbon out. Good to go. Go for another cycle before it has to do it again. But the idea is to try to produce a little less soot. So you have injectors working at their ultimate capacity. You get fuel totally atomized, not droplets of fuel going in. And then you've got to bring some type of lubricant through this system that will not harm the combustion process, but which will lubricate those moving parts. Companies like AMSOIL that I'm involved with, they have a product, a diesel injector cleaner, it's called, which provides this cleaning of the cylinder, the injector tips, but also these days, these injectors, I mean, if somebody wants more information on this when they get in touch with me, the modern injector is about 25% of the size of the old-fashioned injectors, yet it runs at pressures easily 5 to 8 times as high a pressure as the old injectors. Well, up inside that chamber, up inside that injector, it's like if you think of it, it looks like a big pencil almost. And up inside of it, it can get gummed up. And if it does, it slows down the injector. Bob, these injectors have to fire so precisely and so fast that anything that slows them down creates an inefficiency. And so we have to have a cleaner these days that not only will clean the tip, but that it will go up inside that barrel, what they call the armature, and clean out the gunk. And if you don't get that and your injectors begin to slow down, you'll have high soot levels, running inefficiencies. It could get so bad that the injector won't be firing right, and you can end up with a runnability problem. So you have to take this stuff on and use a good injector cleaner and get an injector cleaner that doubles up as a good lubricant. And the old story from the old mechanics, and nothing wrong with it, is true. Some would say, well, run a little transmission fluid in your diesel oil and it'll really keep those injectors lubricated. That was the old big injectors in the older vehicles that ran at maybe 800 PSI in the injector tip. Mm-hmm. These new ones run 24,000 PSI in injector tips. If you run transmission fluid in these modern diesels, you got to realize transmission fluid has things that will not burn. These are called zinc and phosphorus anti-wear additives in the transmission fluid to protect the gears in the transmission. Those are unburnable items, and when they go through this system into the combustion process, they'll create deposits in the cylinder, top of the piston, in the rings, and in the injector tips. So you don't want to run automatic transmission fluid as a lubricant in a modern post-1995 diesel. Okay, if you got a 1980, you probably get away with it and be a happy camper, but you can't do it in these new ones. It will catch up with you. It will put so many deposits in the cylinders and in the injector itself that it will not be a pretty sight when you have to try to figure out how to get those things cleaned. So we just got to be smart about the diesels. These things will run a good quality diesel, such as a Ford Power Stroke, Cummins Turbo Diesel, Chevy Duramax. We're talking about 800,000 mile engines if they are taken care of.
Wow.
And in many cases, that's just because of a few things that might limit them. The basic power plant in these things, especially the Dodge Cummins, that Cummins engine, it's a 1,000,000-mile engine. You just have to take care of it. These things are ruggedly built. They're like commercial quality instead of standard, auto passenger type quality. It's just up to us, the owners and the operators of them, to know how to take proper care of that diesel. We talked last week about the fact you just can't ignore the filters. People get by. Listen, I've seen people just abuse gasoline engines with, well, I just didn't get around to it. I didn't think about it. I went too many miles. My filter, I went twice as long as it should have. And you say, well, let's give the engine a flush and clean it out pretty good and get going and keep going. But that gasoline engine oil doesn't have to do anything to battle soot levels. And in the diesel engine, no matter what you do, you will get soot into your crankcase oil. And if you don't change filters regular or keep up with your maintenance schedules, you'll find yourself with oil that thickens from, say, a 30 weight to a 50 weight, or from a 40 weight to a 60 weight. You start running that thickened 60 weight oil around in that diesel engine, it's not going to be good over a period of time. It can't flow fast enough or well enough through the bearings. You end up with high temperature bearings, excessive wear and moving parts. It's just not a pretty picture. So, but if you change the filter and stick with the recommendations, you'll find that it never gets to a point of any problem. And about half of the diesels on the highway have what they call a bypass filtration system. It's an interesting component. We sell a group of them from AMSOIL for these turbo diesels in cars, the pickup trucks, so forth, even big trucks. We sell them for them too. Because what you find is that you've got to have a filter that is so dense, so to speak, that it will remove soot. But soot is so small. And so these bypass filters that we sell from AMSOIL, they do about 2 microns. My gosh, that's small. A human hair is 40 microns. So we're talking about a very fine filtration. But to filter at that level, your flow rate's not very high. So you couldn't put this in as full flow filter, because what would happen is it would restrict oil flow so much you'd starve bearings.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing technology. We're learning a lot here, as usual, from Dan Watson, the lubepage.com. When we come back on the other side, more with...
Hey, it's Billy F. Gibbons from ZZ Top, and you're listening right here to Auto World.
My name is Bob Long. Dan Watson joined us as he does every week at this very same time on this very same station, or if you're listening to us online at gcnlive.com, we welcome you, and we welcome your emails and calls. Bob at autoworldradio.com, 855-660-4261. Dan has been educating us on the importance of taking care of your diesel engines, and got a comment here from Jordan, and Jordan's in Texas, and he said that he had never heard of an engine being able to go 1,000,000 miles. He wanted to know, is this something he could buy just down at his local Ram dealer?
Well, I will tell you this. If you take care of the Cummins turbo diesel that comes in those Dodge Ram pickups, you take care of it right, it will go 1,000,000 miles. Now, we've always laughed in the past with some of these diesel engines and said, you're going to look funny when you're driving down the road on a frame and the whole body of what was your truck is blown off in the last semi that passed you, because, yeah, your engine and all that went 1,000,000, but you had a little trouble with the truck lasting that long. But the truth is, today, the technology in making the pickup trucks, you remember, Bob, back, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it's just hard to have a truck go more than 10 to 15 years. You started having rust, corrosion problems.
Oh, yeah.
You know, all those things start to ruin the body. Well, as time goes on, these manufacturers are pressed to get better and better, so they really now do an incredible job of rust-proofing a vehicle in the factory by the type of metals they use and the way these things are basically precisionally coated before they're put together, so that everything is well painted and preserved in the nooks and the crannies. And so, yeah, you could probably do an urban cowboy pickup and drive it and get 1 million miles. It'd probably take you 30 years to get there, because imagine, and you'd have to drive 50,000 miles a year in 20 years to get to 1 million miles. Okay, and now I know of, there was a testimonial that I saw, and this wasn't a diesel, but in a gasoline, 5.7 liter GM product, that this engine was transferred between two vehicles, and before it was done, it went 930,000 miles. And the guy that drove it, he drove 80 miles one way to work.
Wow.
So you can accumulate a lot of miles at 80 miles one way to work. We got 160 miles a day, and if you work 5 days a week, that's 800 miles a week. That's what it takes to get up close to 50,000 miles on a vehicle in a year. It takes a lot of driving. But back to these engines real quick before we run out of time. Here's sort of the bottom line, and to keep in mind, and when I tell folks this, you can get in touch with me and get much more information if you have a diesel at thelubepage.com. You can go on there and see lots of information, and then you can always email me a question, ask me something, or call me once you've looked at these videos, because I have videos there about diesel oil, diesel lubrication, and the regeneration cycle system that I spoke about earlier. The objective of the diesel is to understand that, in general, they've always been a dirtier engine than a gasoline engine. So that means you got to pay attention to filters, okay? The other thing is we're running some extremely high-pressure injectors. You cannot allow water or foreign contaminants to get past your filtration system, get into your injector system. If you do, you will mess up some injectors. If water gets in there at the pressure it runs, it will cut the tip of that injector as if it was cut with a diamond-bladed cutting saw. It will just cut a strip right through it at 25. Water at 25,000 psi will cut steel bars. You can use a jet like that to cut physical steel with it. So you just have to understand the pressures we're operating with. So you have to protect your injectors. Always change your fuel filters on time or ahead of time. If necessary, if you're in a pretty rough area that has fuel that can't be depended upon to be as clean as it should be, put a double filter system on. Okay, add a filter and a water separator to your truck. But keep your fuel clean so that when it gets to your injectors, there is never a problem. Remember that fuel, even when it gets through your injectors to the cylinder, doesn't have much lubricity. Do something to fix that. I recommend AMSOIL Injector Cleaner, which includes lubricant. Now, here's one little tip you won't hear any other salesman tell you. Salesman. I'm a lubrication guy, not a salesman. You won't hear this. And that's that if you run a mix of biodiesel and regular diesel, the biodiesel provides the additional lubricity you need, and it'll take care of all that problem. So running a 15, a 5%, 10% biofuel mix is an excellent product in the diesel world, because that biodiesel actually has more lubricity and a slightly higher cetane, which is the burning rate, than regular diesel. So it makes a great mixture. As far as I'm concerned, we should give up on the ethanol and just make biodiesel out of all that feedstock, because it performs so much better in the application than ethanol does. But anyway, so you got to keep the fuel injectors clean. Now, when it comes to oil, you have to run a premium quality oil. This oil is going to do a lot for you, but there's one thing on these engines that you cannot ignore. All of these big diesels have turbocharged diesel. turbos run in the exhaust of the engine. In other words, the exhaust of the engine turns one blade, while on the other side of the separating wall is the fan or the blade that builds the pressure to push the air into the engine. But exhaust gets very, very hot. So what happens is turbos down that shaft, which is common between those two fan blades, gets really hot. Well, there's a bearing supporting this thing. You have got to have oil that can handle high temperature, even though you pump that stuff through there fast. That's one way that they protect the oil. But take, for example, if I run a good quality premium synthetic through that turbo, it can handle intermittent temperatures without any question of 480, 500 degrees. That would be the AMSOIL diesel oil. But you run a petroleum, it's in trouble at 350 degrees. The turbo on the exhaust side many times can run as high as 600 degrees. And they do lots of things to try to mitigate that. But all the same, you have a high temperature situation and a high speed bearing going on there. You have to protect that. I had an ad one time, and I said in that ad, a turbo is a terrible thing to waste. Okay, and it's true. People wonder, why this turbo? It won't freeze up on you, but every time it has trouble with that oil flashing away, it's a little wear and a little wear. Pretty soon, it won't hold its position, and the blades will start to move, and it'll start to tick the side, and then pretty soon your turbo's out. Anybody out there on a diesel, you know what I'm talking about, say your turbo's gone. We're talking about a $2,500, $3,000, $4,000 repair right off the top. Why did it happen? Because you bought some cheap oil. Don't do that. You have to run premium-grade oil in a turbo, gasoline or diesel, but especially in these diesels. That oil has to be premium, good-quality oil. I recommend that you run the oil that I'm familiar with, which is AMSOIL's premium heavy-duty diesel oils. Lots of information on that I can send you if you go to the lubepage.com. But I tell you this, from just an oil consulting side, if that old saying, pay me now or pay me later, you put cheap oil in your diesel, these modern diesels, you'll be paying later and paying at a very high rate because there's so many things that can go bad so fast because that oil begins to lose its ability to lubricate. You just can't take the chance. It's not worth it. It's a gamble with too much to lose. And it's so easy to buy a high-quality lubricating oil. Yes, I think AMSOIL's the one you ought to buy. But there's Mobil Delvac synthetic. There's Shell synthetic. If it's in a turbo diesel, it ought to end with the name synthetic. It ought not to end with, I just got some good oil. It ought to be Shell synthetic, Mobil synthetic, AMSOIL synthetic, Valvoline synthetic. It's got to end in synthetic for these turbo diesels. They're too valuable, too expensive, and you can't take any chances with them. And you need to buy high-quality filters, not the cheap, filter that you can buy at the big box store for nothing. Buy high-quality filters. You're protecting your investment in that diesel tremendously.
There it is.
Take care of them.
You're not kidding. Dan Watson, we'll call you Professor Dan Watson. Thank you so much for joining us. Give out your telephone number one more time.
It's 800-370-2986, and that website is thelubepage.com.
Thank you,
Folks,
Dan.
this is Bob Long, host of Auto World Radio, with great news. We have new sponsors. Nationwide AMSOIL distributors George Douglas and Dan Watson have signed on. George and Dan are two of AMSOIL's largest distributors. George is an expert in aviation maintenance with over 35 years of lubrication experience. Dan is a certified lubrication specialist and a U.S. Navy nuclear propulsion specialist with over 25 years of lubrication experience. These guys can answer all of your questions and ensure you get the best lubrication products for your cars, trucks, boats, or anything that moves. In 1972, AMSOIL pioneered synthetic lubrication for the auto world. AMSOIL provides the best lubrication money can buy. Ensure you get the best results with the best advice. To contact George Douglas, go to oilhelp.com. That's oilhelp.com, or call 800-887-6698. To contact Dan Watson, go to thelubepage.com. That's thelubepage.com, or call 800-370-2986.